Today is March 30th. It's 5:30 Pacific time, and this is a partial meeting of the Global Advisory Council. And we're here to talk about hate speech and hate crimes and restorative justice. We've got four individuals today: Dr. Sandro Calvani of Thailand. We have Jonathan Peter Clayton from South Africa, and Peter B. Collins from San Francisco. And what we'll do is we'll talk about the recent upsurge of attacks on Asians, both in the United States, but also globally. I want you to talk about that, and then we'll talk about hate crimes around the world and restorative justice. So Sandro, why don't you start? Make some comments, and also introduce yourself, of course, a little bit more detail than I just provided.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to all. It's a pleasure to see you because I was not able to attend previous meetings. Situation of restorative justice in Asia, as it is very clear. Good morning, Paulo.
Hey.
Welcome.
Bienvenido.
Thank you.
Situation of restorative justice in Asia, as it is clear from the literature, is not well known and is not well studied. There is not a complete overarching understanding of what is going on. In my own vision, I'm not a specialist in this area. I'm just a practitioner. I see a lot of initiatives and attempt to understand or to improve the situation. We have one general character which is probably common to the rest of the world. The fact that the societies in Asia are divided ideologically and continue to be divided more and more. The same happens in other parts of the world. This division due to ideology creates a big impact on restorative justice because conservative powers and conservative people think of society in a different way of the others. So they have a kind of buffet approach to problems of society. So they want to pick up a few issues and they want to forget all the others. So since this understanding of what we should do, how we should discuss, what should be a priority, is very different, it is practically impossible to have a real fact check-up on what restorative justice could solve in this fight between rich and powerful and poor people and no power, so that remain a very vague understanding of what should be done. The other two characters of this weakness of restorative justice are very Asian. A great diversity of cultures, which is bigger than the rest of the world, much bigger. This is the only continent where religions have been big and bold together. So there is not a majority culture, one religion which is more believed than others, one faith which is stronger than others. Here we have absolutely everything. We have Christianism, we have Islam, we have Buddhism, we have many, many different ways of seeing humankind and the reason why people exist on Earth. This causes fundamental weakness of the foundation of restorative justice, because in these cultures, for example, it's not every time clear who is the offender and who is the victim. So that is a fundamental issue of restorative justice, because you have to put the two together. But in order to put the two together, you have to understand who is the victim and who is the offender. Here, instead, people tend to think that the two things can be mixed. So you will find much more common the word reconciliation, because reconciliation does not require a shared memory of fact, require a shared understanding, agreement that something went wrong, but you don't need to agree on what went wrong and who is the offender and who is the victim. So this applies in many different crimes, and it applies in particular in hate crimes, because a lot of people here who commit hate crimes think to be the victim. So you put, of course, the foundation very difficult. Inequity is also growing in this situation. So the understanding of some fundamentals of society crimes, like access to forest, access to land, labor, education is completely different. So it's difficult to sit down and make a baseline of where we are and where we go. The last one, as I said before, Asia is heavily religious-based society. For this reason, since ever, collective rights have been perceived by people to be much more important than personal rights. So there is the fundamental conflict between what is the priority. And in fact, you have, for example, the death penalty often applied to something which is a collective victim, somebody who has done something wrong to the community, not to the person. So collective rights are more important than personal rights, and therefore the government has a kind of free hand in maintaining the status quo, because they think that the peace, the community live together, even an appearance of peace is more important than anything else. Having a free hand on maintaining the status quo is always interpreted in having a free hand in maintaining order, and therefore they tolerate any kind of crime which at least allows the maintenance of order. Conclusion, just to open the discussion, is that I think that it will be very hard to see an acceleration of restorative justice policies in Asia, including for hate crimes. We'll have more probability to have other approaches like preventative, education, tolerance, understanding of diversity, because that is in a way agreed by everybody. If we avoid hate, then it's much better than trying to reduce hate or manage the hate, because when the hate happened, it stayed there for hundreds and hundreds of years. I could mention at least 12 situations in Asia where the same kind of hatred is there since hundreds of years, and will continue forever and ever.
Okay, well, very interesting comments. Okay, so we'll go around the room and we're going to go to the person that's up the latest, which is now is Jonathan Peter Clayton from South Africa. But let me say this as we talk, because we all have so much to share about this, but let me at least make this comment, which I kind of did, but not really. So we're witnessing a surge of attacks on Asians, and obviously we're seeing quite a bit here in the United States. And that is somewhat new in our history, although clearly it's happened in the past, long ago, though not in recent years. But I want to address that too, and not just about restorative justice, but about the surging of hate crimes. And let me just say this too, we've done 2 podcasts on hate crimes, and one was with Dr. Mark Walters of the University of Sussex in the UK. We did that in 2018. It was an excellent discussion, and he is an expert on hate crimes, and he was a victim of hate crimes himself, hate crime himself, by the way, but he's done a lot of evidence-based research on hate crimes and restorative justice. And then we did a podcast, I think 2019, with one of our colleagues, Pastor Jack Sullivan in Ohio, and we talked about attacks on Black Americans. So now let's move to Pastor Jonathan Clayton. And Pastor Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself formally, and each person should, for the record.
Good day to all of you. It's good to be in contact with all of you. I am Jonathan Clayton here in South Africa. I'm involved with restorative justice and victim offender dialogue process in correctional facilities here in South Africa. And it's a process that it's in huge demand here in South Africa. In the next 2 months, I will be in about 5 correctional centers for 36 hours per correctional center on this process. Good day to you, Upneet. Good to see you too. Yeah, so it's an honor and privilege for me to represent RJI here also in South Africa. So yeah, I'm glad that Lisa mentioned about Mark Walters, because I listened to Mark Walters earlier on when you sent the clip, and I also now listened to Sandro in terms of the whole challenge of hate crime, and it's very scary when I just listened to Mark, where he referred to 80% of hate crimes in England and Wales alone. And then he refers to the UK, the USA, and Europe. And then also that there is an increase of 29% of hate crimes in these areas. So it is very scary, and that is why it is important when we look at the concept of hate crimes and also restorative justice. As you know, that South Africa went through the apartheid years, where we became the democracy in South Africa with the leadership, or under the leadership, of Nelson Mandela. Now, where everybody thought there will be more hate crime and even civil war, he led us into the process of, instead of retributive justice, into restorative justice, where they had here in South Africa the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And looking at hate crimes across the world and the challenges of that, is it's evident that it look like these are challenges that will come up many times, and especially in South Africa, in terms of the hate crimes in South Africa. As I did a little research of our own country here, many of our hate crimes now is a lot amongst university students, because of all different cultures and racial groups. And there were two white students that painted themselves black, and the media caught hold of that pictures, and it was just a huge challenge on that specific university. And then out of that, it was obviously the hate crimes, and that is where in South Africa, when hate crimes was discussed and even defined, they looked at is it harmful, and also does it promote and just more hate, where people can have physical fights and violence, which happened a lot even of our universities. And that is why amongst different race and gender and sex and even ethnical groups, that's where I find here in our country where there's a lot of hate crimes, and that spills over into our communities, and it affects our families as well. Now, there was one person that made a statement, and the person, now a certain area of our country, at one of the beaches, is the majority of people that's going to that specific beach is unfortunately people that will be identified as Black people. And a white person made a statement and said on her Facebook that the Black people on the beach look like monkeys, and drawing the conclusion that both behave the same when it comes to making a mess on public beaches. And it was a huge challenge. It was scary. when we experience how violence occurred because of hate crime. And then on the other hand, you can't even blame in South Africa now. It's more it's either Black people that's involved in hate crime or white people. So it's both sides. Again, on university, you will have on campuses students that's spraying on the walls, F you white people, and some other students, F you Black people, kill the white people. And so that is the kind of tension that's there. Then I think it's got a lot to do with people's own identity as well, because we that struggled in the apartheid years, that was previously disadvantaged, and there is many times that there is that feeling of hate because of the past. If you look at the privileges that people had in the apartheid years, the best beaches, the best areas close to mountains and all that and so on. And now where we stay, it will cost us about 4 times more with the same size of house to go stay where people stayed in the apartheid years. And it brings something in you. But if you know who you are, and if you know your own identity, and you can deal with the fact that these are things that happened to us before, there is nothing that we can do now, then you can control yourself. But there are now other people, and especially our younger generation, that were not even involved in the apartheid years, that is more active in hate crime than ever before.
Okay.
And that in itself is scary as well. That is why, let me just mention the last one.
Let me cut you off here, and because let's go around the room, and then we'll open it up and we'll have more of a free exchange. Okay. And let's go to Upneet. Welcome, Upneet, and introduce yourself. And also, when you're making comments, please talk about the connection with hate crimes with hate speech as we're going, okay? Because I do want to talk about that, and I want to talk about public policy, and then we'll talk about free speech with Peter B. Collins talking about that as a broadcaster. So Upneet, go ahead and introduce yourself. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to again join this conversation, and on a very relevant topic of hate crime. I'm Dr. Upneet Lalli. I'm from the Institute of Correctional Administration in India. This is in the north of India, Chandigarh, which deals primarily with the training of prison and police officers. And I've been, in fact, working on this part of looking at, we've been sensitizing university students as well. When you're talking about hate crime and hate speech. So about in November, we had discussed this topic, in fact, in the conference with Himachal Pradesh Law University. And what we have seen now is in India, in the context of what is happening in our country, that there has been an increasing divide between different communities. And in India, what we are seeing is hate crime based on religious grounds, based on ethnicity and gender. These are the areas where we are finding, and the increasing use of hate speech, particularly on the social media. Now, this is something that is terrifying, because on the social media, on the social platform, the news spreads very fast, the outreach is much more, and also it's instant. We've had a background where, in fact, the link between South Africa and India's freedom struggle started with the hate crime, I would say, when Mahatma Gandhi was thrown out of the train in South Africa because he was an Indian. So in that sense, we have that historical baggage and we have experienced all that during the partition, which I would say was the biggest massacre that took place when communities from Pakistan and India, when they had to, the Sikhs and the Hindus had to leave Pakistan and enter India, and similarly the Muslims went to Pakistan, and about 1 million lives were lost in that. And the hatred was so much that there was rape, there was killing, and there was everything that took place. And till date, I think that justice has not been done because the harms that were done were never acknowledged and never repaired. And when we talk further, I'll suggest my own insights and solutions into this, because we see that trauma has carried back through the generations. So that trauma that has been there, that has not been healed. So in the Constitution, we do have, that no divisions to take place, and our preamble does say that, assuring the fraternity and focusing on the dignity of individuals, so that there is nothing like this that takes place. And but we have had over the years different types, and India has had riots at different points of time. So 84 is something that strikes in my memory when I was just a child. And our Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, she was killed by her own bodyguards, who happened to be Sikh gentlemen, because she had attacked our Golden Temple. And that led to massive killing of Sikhs who were in other places and other cities, and Delhi and in UP and in many other places. It witnessed the worst kind of massacres that took place, where people were pulled out of their homes, they were burnt alive, they were killed, women were raped, and justice has never been done. It's taken them so many years to actually hold those persons accountable. Some of them were politicians who gave inflammatory speeches, who said that these people should be killed. That that accountability, if justice had been done in that first instance, people felt unsafe because of their own religion. I remember we felt unsafe traveling because of our own identity. So it's and then we've had riots, and again with the Hindu-Muslim riots, India has witnessed many times. So in that sense, the emotions, when they become too strong, so any other crime, if it's murder, it's a murder and you hold that person accountable. But with a hate crime, there's a specific type of a motivation that happens, that is it because of hatred of the other, or because of so much love of your own identity and so much fear of the other that you want to destroy the other? I think that otherness, that viewing the others as very different from you, is something that is leading to a whole lot of fissions and a whole lot of conflict in society, be it in India or be it in other places. And so when this incident in US happened, and Black Lives Matter became important movement, it was something that resonated with us, and we talked about it. It was deeply resonated with us because the law enforcement authorities, when they also carry this hatred for the other communities based on grounds of religion or ethnicity or race or anything else, then it's a very poor reflection of the law and order, and it sends fears and chills down the spine. So recently we've had, in the past 4 or 5 years, in fact, I was looking at the Amnesty report of 2019 was the last that they had come out with. There were 181 incidences of hate crime that were reported in our country. And and where the law enforcement officers have been found to be on the back foot, they have been a part of that, and they have possibly, if not provoked, sometimes they have also sheltered these persons who have indulged in these crimes. And it started off with a murder of a man who was lynched by a mob, by a cow vigilantism group, which thought that they were eating beef and they had killed cows. So that person was pulled out of the van, pulled out of his home and was killed. And this was, I mean, the matter went to the court also, and we've had a few cases. In fact, when the Supreme Court of India said that India should not turn into a mobocracy, that based on this, when you're having vigilante groups taking law into their hands and killing people just because they think that this person has done something, that this would not really result in law and order, but it would result in India turning into a mobocracy. So this is what, I mean, and we have had increasing incidences in, I mean, 2 years back, we had the Delhi riots again based on there was a law which was introduced, which has been introduced in terms of Indian citizenship being offered to only those persons beyond a certain time and based on certain factors. And you had a lot of Muslims protesting against this law, in particular from the northeast of India, who feared that they would be denied citizenship. And there were riots that took place in Delhi itself, which was something which was because we never thought that again, you know, the city would witness such a scene. It's the national capital, that people will be pulled out of their homes because of their religion or something. So that extreme violence, I mean, it's not just name calling and bullying that happens,
Right.
but we find that in the extreme form of killing and rioting that takes place. And there have been cities which have witnessed these over time, but there have also been lessons that have been learned and harmony that has been established, which is very akin to your restorative policing experiments, where at the mohalla level, you know, at the community level, where people are living mingled together, where their petty conflicts are resolved in a manner by the community themselves. And one of these cities in Maharashtra, in fact, which used to witness these rioting incidences frequently, you know, somebody would say, okay, there's in a temple, this has happened. But when this experiment started, that the community conflicts were resolved by the people themselves, that this place did not witness any rioting even when the Babri Masjid was broken, so was attacked. So this has been something that they have learned, that when you have these, you know, communities working and the police working actively with them, community policing experiment, that the conflict reduces and it helps to bring more harmony.
Yes, yes, very good. Very good. Okay, well, let's move on and then we'll come back as a group. And Paulo, why don't you introduce yourself to the group and make your comments? Welcome.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I'm Paulo Moratelli from Brazil. I'm a psychologist working with restorative justice for 10, 11 years now. Most of the stuff that I've been done is on more serious crimes, sexual violence, gender violence, homicides, and so on. Lisa, on the subject we're dealing today, Brazil was before was a good place to live. Yeah, we didn't have so much of hate crimes and so on, but in the past few years, I believe that we became more and more polarized between two different ideological political views. So it's becoming worse and worse. Every year become worse. Every election becomes worse, and so on. So right now I'm in fear that the next presidential election in 2022 will be very problematic. We have some confrontations before. I believe that it will happen again and worse. So it kind of me worries a lot. But what have so the hate crimes in social media as in everywhere has happened in Brazil too. We have it a lot in soccer fields. We have especially in racism. Racism is becoming to be a problem in Brazil too. It seems to be that was not a problem before, but I don't know if wasn't really a problem, or if we just never look at it in the most deep way. We're still trying to understand that. But one thing that I want to bring in this conversation is something that's been happening in the past months in Brazil. Everywhere in the world, we all are using Zoom. Yes, everybody in the world is using Zoom. There are other platforms, but the Zoom is the most used. So there is this new thing called Zoom bombing. Do you know it? This term, Zoom bombing. It became it's happening a lot in Brazil. Um, Hate crimes occurring through this Zoom bombing, which is people intruding the video conferencing. Especially when
And
they
Paulo,
talk about.
hopefully it doesn't happen today.
No, we will not. We hope
Okay.
not. What happened is when they see an invitation for a Zoom conference in the social media, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, they invaded this video conference, especially if it talks about women, where equality, gender, etc. So they will invite it. They will. Use racist, misogynistic attacks, using pornography, even rape images. They use the
Oops.
to share videos and images of rape and all types of crimes, especially against women and black people. So it happened more and more. I have some friends that has this problem with their meetings. Never happened to me to yet. We're sharing the link, the Zoom link, only few minutes before our meetings. And I have this guy who works with me, who helps me, who uh, always looks who is entering the room. So there's no way. I guess there's no. It would be much more difficult for that happen to us, but you never know. So that's the thing that got me at my attention. It's different, it's new, and I don't see the rest of the problems with sex and gender and race and so on. We have a law in Brazil since 1989, establishes crimes resulting from prejudice of race and color, and they expanded the comprehension on this law to include crimes against homosexuals and other minorities. So it's pretty much difficult for people in Brazil to really committed a hate crime and doesn't have a problem with the law. So it's not so much commune in between us, the hate crimes, but it's becoming to happen because of ideology. As Sandro is telling, this polarization is becoming more and more a problem for us. That's the main landscape here, Lisa.
Okay. Okay, well, this segues, I think, into Peter B. Collins, who has been a broadcaster and in the media for many, many years. So Peter, why don't you introduce yourself and make your comments? Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Peter B. Collins, I'm based in San Francisco. I have been working in media since Nixon was our president. I worked as a talk radio host for many years. And I hosted a podcast with an international audience that I retired from at the end of last year after about 11 and a half years. So first I want to thank the participants here because particularly for people who view this in the United States, we're quite myopic, and we believe that our issues with race and class and hate speech are unique, and they are not. Also, the rise of nativist leaders who promote division has been very disturbing here in the United States during the last 4 years of the Trump administration. But that too is not unique to this country. As an outspoken and opinionated left of center host, I really value the free speech rights that we have here in the US. So it's a bedrock principle for me, and our Constitution in the First Amendment guarantees, in general, unfettered, unregulated speech. We had conventions and protocols that were not embedded in law, but were part of our social contract that have been seriously unraveled in the last 25 years or so. And as a member of the media, I have to take some responsibility for that, because shock speech originated in the commercial media in this country. And sure, we've had tabloid newspapers and, before the internet, there certainly was hate speech that occurred. But like we heard from the other members of this panel, it has been sped up and amplified and turned into a much more vicious level of exchange because of the internet and most recently because of social media. So just a brief arc. Rush Limbaugh, who died recently, was the first practitioner of this politically incorrect speech, poking satire and cruel humor, and as we say, punching downward, not upward. So he made fun of homeless people, of African-American leaders, of feminists and women in general. And he had a clear subtext of promoting class divides, promoting the wealthy over those with less. So the Limbaugh model, and I won't go into great detail, but there is a direct connection to the rise of Fox News. That is a cable channel here in the United States owned by Rupert Murdoch, a global negative force, I'll be polite about it, who has exploited the political divisions and used various not so subtle methods to divide Americans. Then with the rise of social media, particularly with Twitter, which is based here in San Francisco, and I'll note that Twitter is a true challenge to my First Amendment belief in free speech. But Twitter unleashed a kind of attack communication where you have people who are posturing one better than the other, one smarter than the other, and using brief but mean-spirited language to attack virtually anybody who doesn't genuflect before them. Well, this enabled Donald Trump in a very critical way. And I believe that there is deep malfeasance on the part of Twitter in permitting him to spew lies and hateful attack comments on a daily basis, leading up to the insurrection at our Capitol on January 6th. And the post-insurrection denial by his loyal followers is a very dangerous virus in American society. So the rejection of what was called political correctness by Trump has led to the anti-Asian sentiments. He repeatedly used the phrase China virus to refer to COVID-19, and he welcomed attacks on Asians here in the United States. And so to briefly recap, here in ultra-liberal San Francisco, we've had several daytime attacks on Asians who were just walking down the street, mostly by white males in their 20s. Just yesterday, captured on video and spread on social media, was an incident in New York City where outside, this was captured on surveillance video cameras, outside an apartment building on West 43rd Street, an Asian woman who was just walking past was suddenly tackled by a fairly large, and I've seen one picture of the suspect, so I'll refer to him as a suspect, but he is an African-American male, 30 to 40. He not only knocked her to the ground, but he then stomped on her head 3 times when she could not defend herself. And to add to this injury, the doorman of the apartment building that the video was shot through closed the door and left her on the street in a callous reaction of, well, this isn't my business. Now, we also have had the white male 20-year-old shooter in Atlanta who apparently had some pretty serious problems with sexual repression and took that out on Asian massage parlors. We then had the shooting in Boulder, Colorado by a Syrian immigrant. He has lived in the United States since he was 3 years old, so he is truly a Syrian American. And, you know, his appears to be a case of mental illness. We don't know so far that there was a hate motive. But in the United States, the amplification of social media, of hate speech, together with the easy access to automatic, semi-automatic weapons, is producing, you know, real carnage in our communities. So I want to stop there because I want other people to speak up. But I do want to come back to the issues of free speech and a clear need to have standards by corporate hosts of speech platforms, and the need to address the racial and economic divides that have been exploited by political leaders in this country. And I also want to just complete this opener by saying that I look forward to hearing how restorative justice can be applied here, because these are very difficult issues with deep-seated emotional and you know, long-running grievances that the offenders, I think, are very hard to address. And certainly, you know, we have hate crime laws that can add to their criminal sentences, but as we know, that does not necessarily change behavior. If anything, it's unlikely to do so. So I am very interested in hearing how restorative justice can be applied to this, you know, very complex set of issues.
Well, those are good comments, Peter. Okay, who would like to respond to that? I have comments, but Sandro, would you like to make some comments or response or add on?
Yes, of course, we are very worried here of this new appearance of crimes against Asia in the US. We think that it could happen also in other parts of the world, including Europe, but we have nothing to comment in Asia because this does not happen, of course, in this part. However, the hate of the majority of the Burmese people against the Rohingyas is a very other clear example that it can happen also here. It did happen. It reached the level of a genocide. So some approach of other parts of the world on the free speech, which has to be absolutely free, worries a lot in Asia, because in Asia, instead they think that free speech cannot be as free as to affect the community. So the government should have a kind of power to control speech. Here in Thailand, for example, we have a legislation on information technology. We have a ministry of information technology does not do anything else than control the social networks and any kind of hate crimes. In particular, some crimes in some countries in Asia which are against the system are absolutely considered very grave. So there is no hope to make a so big hate speech that this will go completely, sorry, there is no hope to make a completely free speech legislation that the thing will be out of control. However, in order to keep this control, we also have to give up on any real restorative justice on this. This is what happened in Asia. Restorative justice is not applied because nobody has been able to recognize who is the offender and who is the victim when there is a hate crime. Often people think that the society is the offender because the society did not educate, the society did not prevent. So there will be no action against that hate crime because there should be an action against the society.
Okay, other comments?
I think it's also important what you mentioned earlier. We had to look at hate crime and hate speech, what we define here in South Africa in terms of hate speech is that although there are many people that has a lot of hatred against different groups, as we already identified here, and how people react to social media as well. And in South Africa, the hate speech is as low, although it is extremely humiliating when there is hate speech, but in South Africa, as long as there is no criminal activities, because the moment there is criminal activities in terms of hate speech, then they will refer to that as hate crimes, where people become violent and fight against people. And that is why I'm looking at the challenge of hate speech and hate crime and the violence that goes with that, and the question of who is the victim. I think it is important that government needs to take charge of this challenge. And like in our country, there is still a gray area in terms of hate speech and hate crime and freedom of speech, because there is also there is a part of freedom of speech, but in our constitution, it is very narrow when it comes to freedom of speech, because the only expression in terms of freedom of speech is if it is where there is propaganda for war, then it is then not a freedom of speech. But in any other area, we have the freedom to say how we feel and to challenge, but it still needs to be with respect and not humiliating and not violent.
Yes, yes. Well, let me make a couple of comments. I've kind of been holding back a little bit, but I think Peter made some really good points, especially in just painting the picture of the United States in recent years. And obviously this is very troubling here in this country, but looking at hate speech and hate crimes around the world, that we're seeing a surge. So a couple points. This is one, just telling a little story about myself. So in the 1980s, I was involved in a civil rights organization in Sacramento, California. And it was a very loose knit civil rights group. We had no money whatsoever, but we were people that came together who were concerned about racial violence. And this was in the 80s, and the Klan was active in Northern California and the neo-Nazi party. So I was at a rally at the state capitol in Sacramento where the Klan came in their robes and had a rally. And I stood facing the Klan as there were state troopers on horses right at the Capitol. And I remember at that time, I think I told this to Jonathan, this story, but I realized I hated these people. I realized that, and I walked away from that rally thinking, well, I'm about as bad as they are because they hate me and they hate other people here. And I didn't know a thing about restorative justice in the 80s, nothing. But let me tell you how I think it applies, Peter and others, and Sandro's comment. I think it definitely applies because what we need to get back to is to look for a victim and an offender. And to me, there clearly are. And I think that when we reduce it down to, we don't know who the offender is and we don't know who the victims are, whether it's a victim or community, then we lose the vision of restorative justice. When I did the podcast with Dr. Mark Walters in the UK, he was a victim of hate crime. He was a gay man and he had been victimized. And we talked about what was needed, and his comments, he brought up so many things that are important to restorative justice: the need for dialogue between victims and offenders, the need for the offender to have empathy, the need to bring people together in community after hate crimes, and the need to, and this is critical, we all know about restorative justice, we need to give victims a voice after they've been victimized. And then he made a comment that he thought that victims needed to have reparations, which is restitution. But I think of San Francisco in particular, because in 2019, we endorsed Chesa Bodine, who ran for district attorney. And he's currently district attorney there in San Francisco, where a lot of hate crimes are going on. Now we endorsed him, RJI endorsed him because he supported restorative justice. And as I've been watching him react to the violence in San Francisco, I realize I'm not sure how deep his understanding is. Now I say that not to be overly critical, but I think most politicians do not know how to apply it. And they're worried they're going to look soft on crime. And then they also don't quite know how to hold offenders accountable. But the Asian Americans in San Francisco are angry. That you can see both in San Francisco and New York and other places in the United States where this is going on. And they need a voice. And that's where restorative justice is critical, because if nothing else, they need to be heard. And for any kind of healing to occur, even if the offender is never held accountable, they need that voice. So Upneet, do you have comments?
Yes, I mean, what Peter said and what you are mentioning is something that is very much more something that I would say in India, when we're looking at issues of victims having a voice. So it's the whole community that is affected, and where I feel that the healing hasn't taken place in the communities who were affected is because the victims did not find a voice. We've had some of the riot victims being reparated or being, homes being reestablished after they've been burned. But there's been we've not heard what has happened to them. And that becomes very important. I recall one photo exhibition, of the 84 riots that was there in a temple that they had put in. And all those images that were there. So it was a voice that was, and some of those victims, they had got together that they needed to be healed. So politicians, yes, hear them for some time, and they promise them something. They promise them, okay, you'll get back. And we do have laws, against, free speech or attacking the scheduled caste, because they are scheduled caste. We have that law, which is very effective. But unless and until, we are having that message percolate of how people can live, I think I would go beyond the law, but how people can live in harmony with each other. That becomes important and critical. And there's another thing in terms of when you're talking about how it developed in US and in India also, when we're having politicians become proponents of hate speech. And another thing is what I have seen is when you are having a large number of Twitter followers who are extremely vitriolic and who have posted horrible messages, and then you're not unfollowing them. Now, as a minister, as a prime minister, what message it sends to the others, that becomes important.
Yes.
So we've had some of the ministers coming up with absolutely offensive speeches, remarks, whether in public or on the social media, but not a word of apology or not a word of condemnation that takes place. It sends a message, an implied message that it is okay.
Yes.
So I think here the accountability should also be fixed, and there has to be some control on the corporates, because we've seen, in Twitter in US, but even in India, we've seen that the right wing will not be controlled by Twitter, and they'll succumb to the political pressure. But and we've had some of the civil rights activist accounts being frozen and the content being blocked. So, I mean, those are double standards that you're having. So that is something that it's a huge, power that the corporates have, the media houses have, in terms of influencing prejudices, in terms of influencing the minds of people. And where do we hold that? I mean, where are the guidelines in place? Is it going to be self-imposed, or is it going to be imposed by the others? That's something we really need to look into. And that's a whole new terrain that we are walking in. And I also feel, that there is a large amount of, misogyny that some of these leaders have expressed. And only recently we had one of the chief ministers passing such horrific remarks about women wearing ripped jeans and making fun of them. And not a word of condemnation by the political class from his own party. And these are the people that people have elected. So you wonder, that whether people are wanting such kind of persons, and whether they're going to be role models for the others. So this is something, that, and women stood up against those comments, women from a lot of political parties, but from the main party from which this man had spoken, there wasn't much of, condemnation that took place. So this is something, when we are saying that to the lowest common denominator, you are getting your message for, and not for higher standards that your messaging is. That is something that's extremely sad. And it's a country where Mahatma Gandhi actually used to, when India won freedom, he actually was trying to heal the wounds of the victims that had taken place. So, so we've seen, what one person, a leader can do in terms of healing, and what a leader should not do also, that also we are seeing. So both classes, and you can vote, you can take, credit for something, but those are the kind of idols, and that's the kind of healing touch that is much required in today's time.
Yes. Yes. Go ahead, Paulo.
I want to add some ideas on what we can do. I believe we talk too much about what divided us, what separates us, especially in social media. And sometimes even us, between us who restorative justice advocates, focus a lot on what divides us, and not in this meeting here. I believe we can use restorative justice conferencing circles and so on to create traction and create space for dialogue, who can improve mutual understanding, openly talk about human values, to identify our similarities in terms of humanity, which is we have in each one of us, to improve the idea of otherness, to improve the respect for the others' ideas and positions. And what if you can agree, but you can respect the other one's ideas and positions? And I believe we can do it in a very easy way. I believe it. Dialogues through video conferencing platforms such as Zoom, which guarantees even greater security for this dialogue for the participants, since we're not at the same place in the same room and so on. In the past year, I've conducted with some associates of mine here in Brazil a lot of Zoom dialogues, which we call transformative dialogues, talking about three main themes. One is the social distancing, people who are suffering on social distancing, financially, emotionally, and etc. People who have autistic child and at home, it's been very difficult for them, because when you have an autistic child, is very difficult when things change. They need some safe space. And also for school communities, people were very really struggling with the what is happening here in Brazil. We are now more than 300 people die every day. Probably will reach 5,000 deaths per day. So everything is closed, shut down. We have this lockdown everywhere. So to be simple, we can do that, inviting people through to video conferencing, talking about values and so on. That's the simplest thing that we can imagine, and will be the most powerful thing that we can do.
Good comments. Others?
Well, it is very interesting once again, as you all mentioned about the way forward in this, and the strong word, Lisa, that you mentioned here, the voice of the victims. And it was interesting on crime and the increase of crime in our country. On the 7th of April, which is next weekend, Wednesday, we invited a group of victims, especially rape victims and victims involved in violent crimes, on Zoom to share about their ordeals, because that is the platform that we need to create for people to air their experiences, because that is important. Politicians also, they need to hear the pain, the stories and the ripple effect of people that were attacked in hate crimes and hate speech and violence and all that and so on. So what Paulo also was saying, and Upneet also saying there, that like the Brazil challenges in the future regarding the elections, and how politicians also make themselves guilty of hate crimes and hate speech. So they are not the people that actually can help resolve these challenges. We need to get the voice of the victims.
Peter?
Well, I want to, without disrespecting the good intentions of everyone on this panel, our spirit and our sense of loving our neighbor is lost on too many people who are very comfortable promoting hate. And it operates at the individual level. People who, and let me add that Lisa argues that there is a clear victim. Well, that is complicated now because victim has been perverted and redefined. And Donald Trump considers himself a victim, and he appeals to a victim mentality of so many of the people who come to what I call his mob rallies. And they are mob rallies, and it's practice for indoctrination of people into hate of the other. And just on a lighter note, Jonathan, I love your background of the Golden Gate Bridge. We charge for that. There's a toll that you need to pay to use that image. And I'm saying that to point out
Peter,
that
we'll pay for it.
well, but my more serious point is that the profiteering from the exchange of hate speech. Twitter is, valued at umpteen millions or billions of dollars based on its potential to excite hate, to create controversy, or some say controversy. And as long as that is the case, and that our media outlets, and I know Brazil to be a very extreme media environment, where certain networks that promote the philosophy and the policies of the Bolsonaro administration are very similar to Fox News and its offspring. We now have lesser networks that are actually more virulent than Fox. And so I challenge us to consider that the masses of people who embrace the hate speech, to whom it unleashes their own misguided sense of victimization and allows them to hate the other. And I'll add one other point, again, accepting blame on the part of the United States, that our military operations, the wars in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, these have unleashed massive refugee populations. And the Chinese filmmaker, I'm trying to think of his name right now, at any rate, he produced this film about the migrating populations. We have 60 million plus refugees around the world, internally or externally displaced. That impact is most felt in Europe, and Italy and France and Germany have seen the rise of tensions. In Germany, the rise of a new era of Nazi identified hate groups. And so these are very complex issues with, deeper roots. And again, respectfully, I challenge us to come up with models that can penetrate what is left of the hearts of those who harbor hate in those hearts.
Can I make a quick comment, Lisa?
Sure, and I think we're going to lose Sandro, but we've got Jack Sullivan on the call too. So go ahead, Paulo, and then I think Sandro will make his
a quick
last
comment.
comments.
Peter, that's another again that you have when you have these conversations, because when the people who has those ideas, okay, listen to themselves and listen to the other ones, like then they start to reflect. That's a thing that happens. It's like a therapeutic environment for them. So they need to talk about it. More they talk about it in the different landscape, not in the social media where they are behind their computers and so on. But they see people reacting what they're talking about in the very respectful environment. Changes can happen. I've seen this happening in the hundreds of circles that I facilitated. So that's, again, I believe creating the conditions to talk about in those safe environments will be very, very good, including to achieve what you're talking about, Peter.
Sandro, did you have comments before you leave?
Yes, I fully support the position by Paulo. In fact, this is what I said at the beginning. Prevention works much better. And this is also the story of what we did in Doitung, where we had all these ethnic minorities hating each other so much that it was totally unthinkable that there was love among them. So it was totally forbidden for a woman of one ethnic minority to marry a man from another. So the hate was inbuilt everywhere, in the schools, in the churches, on the street. Our path of 30 years has been free TV channels, all day, 24 hours a day, for 30 years, convincing people that we all have the same rights. And now we have the most peaceful area in the country. We have the richest area in the country. We have 78% per capita income higher than Bangkok. We attract people from all over the world. Last year, we had 200 delegations visiting our experiment. What we did was change the mind, change the mindset. So when you change the mindset, the development, the peace is sustainable because you've changed the people. You cannot change just the speech, you have to change the mind. And this requires a lot of prevention, and I support the idea of value-based education that Paulo and also Peter were saying. And we, I think as restorative justice being a very specialized movement, we can do a lot in this area because we bring experience, and people love stories. People love success stories where it happened, like our podcast and so on.
Okay, thank you.
And then I have to say goodbye to you because my time is finished.
Thank you, Sandro. Thanks for being with us. Okay, thank you. And so we'll make a couple more comments here. Jack is on the line here. Jack, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone.
Welcome. Late, but we're glad you're here.
Thank you very much. I am vacationing with my family, and I found a few moments to get away just to jump into the call and say hello to everyone.
Thank you. Well, you heard what the topic was, so we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Let me make this comment, and then maybe we can get Jack to make some other comments too. But so just in hearing what Paulo said and Sandro, let me say this with my background in this field, and you know, it's for many years. I think we need prevention, but we also need to be there for the victims. And I think we can operate in the micro and the macro in restorative justice because both are needed. And but I do believe in education. I do believe in prevention, but I don't think that can be the only response. And you'll appreciate this. Right after the election here in the United States in 2016, I surprisingly received a call from a radio station in San Francisco that Peter B. Collins would know very well. In fact, I think you were on the air there. It was KCBS. And I got a call in 2016, and they were calling RJI, and they wanted my reaction to the election of President Trump and about his hate speech. And at that time, he had appointed Stephen Bannon, and as we know, on the far, far right. And they said, what do you think? Do you think restorative justice applies to the United States? And I had like 3 minutes to talk, but I said, yes, it does apply to the election of this president-elect, the president-elect, because his hate speech has an impact on the country and will. Well, it did, and it has, and it will continue. But I think people need to know that there are people that won't be silent when we hear the hate speech, and that we won't stand for it. Because when we're silent is when we endorse it. And I think that's the difference today. And, you know, the one good thing today, just looking at the United States, is that this president isn't here any longer. And I am so grateful for that. So I think his supporters are still there, yes, but I don't think they're there like they were 4 years ago. Now, we haven't seen any consequences after the January attack on the US Congress, and that we had a Zoom call about that violence as well, and the need to apply restorative justice. And we need to continue to urge that. So wherever violence occurs, wherever people are harmed, we need to respond. And then, as I said, we also need to be proactive. So other comments? And then we'll be closing soon.
Well, I'm happy I could join you briefly here tonight. I'm just concerned that we take a historical look at the origins of white supremacy and make some determinations concerning the impact of white supremacy on public policy and public attitudes toward people of color or non-white people around the world, particularly in the United States, but not limited to the United States. I think
Jack,
there's a way for
the record, can you introduce yourself formally?
Oh, absolutely. I am Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan Jr., and I am the executive director of the Ohio Council of Churches based in Columbus, Ohio, USA.
Thank you. And go ahead.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, so I honestly believe that while hate speech certainly is a worrisome and dangerous element, we need to go back historically and look at the origins of white supremacy and then racism and hate speech, and begin to see how all of these have been woven into the fabric of much of life in the world, and particularly in this case, the United States that we've been speaking of, and to figure out some ways to dismantle discrimination and challenge the white supremacy that supports violence and supports intimidation and humiliation of non-white people, particularly Asian persons in the United States. We have to go further than looking at the Trump administration, because white supremacy in many cases, in many ways, gave rise to his presidency. And so we have to go back further than his administration.
Certainly. So, yes, thank you. Yes, Jonathan?
I just want to I mean, I hear, and it is definitely true and said about the historical facts of different countries in terms of white supremacy. In South Africa now, it turned around from white supremacy to black supremacy, where now any other than black, you don't get, people don't get jobs, people don't get promotions. The wheel is turning. But on the other hand, now where hate speech and hate crimes comes in from the whites again that struggle to get jobs, they will now still say that, but we still in a better position from an economic point of view. So because there are so many whites that own so much land in South Africa, and so that is the what do we do with the historical challenges, because the wheels is turning all the time, and so it is also something that we need to get the voice of the young people, to equip our younger generation in terms of hate crime and hate speech and restorative justice, because there's very little that we can do about the historical facts of the challenges that we all face. And I see it in our country here, and it is just the one group that takes over the other group is just dominance and control again. And that also brings some hate and anger in people.
Well, I like the comment that Paulo made and others endorsed, just the idea of dialogue. Clearly, we need to open up the dialogue. And what's interesting about this call, I actually sought out a number of Asian Americans, mostly Americans, to try to get someone on this call to represent that community, which of course is large. But I couldn't get anyone to agree to come on. But partly I think it's because there's a lot of fear and a lot of anger. And then I think they look at what we're doing, perhaps been hearing about restorative justice and thinking, what's that? You know, but yet having those conversations and listening to those that are harmed and injured is so critical, as we know. But I do agree with what Pastor Jack said in terms of taking on racism, systemic racism in this country and internationally. I mean, that's a real need. And I do think it comes into the work that we do. Maybe not so directly, but maybe so. I mean, we're having these conversations through Zoom, not because we wanted to, but because we have to, because of COVID. But yet it does open up the space, doesn't it? It gives us this way to have this conversation around the world, which is very powerful. Other comments?
I just want to tell that
Okay.
I'll be really happy to help you, Lisa, and others, to arrange something like that. Okay.
Good. Let's do that. Good. Thank you. Upneet.
Yeah, you know, I have friends in United States, and one question that does arise in the communities is in terms of assimilating within the culture and also making their children understand that if you encounter this, how do you respond? And having friends, I mean, just sitting together and having meals together is something that removes the otherness. So that's one way forward, you know, that could be started off in any place. And in another way is we are looking at, you know, laws as a solution and having stringent punishment. That is not the only solution. But yes, there also we could be more imaginative, that rather than sending those persons into prison, you put them into, you know, repairing those harms.
Yes.
If they've damaged property, if they've painted graffiti, let them, you know, repaint, redo, and let them realize that how much common they have in the shared common humanity that we have with each other. So that's something.
I totally agree with that. Let me just add to that, because this is something that we really haven't said in the last hour. You know, I have a legislative background, so I always think about public policy, and I was doing some research on hate crimes legislation in the United States. And of course, there's now calls for strengthening the laws that we have in the United States to make sure that they're wide enough to include everyone who's being injured or could be for whatever reason. And I think there's a need for that. But as Upneet just said, and I totally agree, we need to make sure restorative justice is injected into that conversation. Because, and that's perhaps what the prosecutor in San Francisco doesn't understand yet, is that those that have been harmed, who are victims, they do want to see offenders held accountable. But what does that look like? And we always ask that question. Does it mean incarceration? Not necessarily. What does it mean? Ask the victims. We need to ask the victims. And because they might want something completely different, but they do want accountability, and they do want that offender to know what was done to them. And that's what restorative justice is all about. But that needs to be in the debate about legislation in any country around hate crimes. Peter?
Well, Lisa, I just want to note in that vein that one of the victims, an elderly woman here in San Francisco, who was attacked in broad daylight and managed to, she had a walking stick or something, but she beat up the guy who was attacking her, and passersby held him for the police. That led to a crowdfunding campaign that raised $1 million within a week. And I don't know this woman's circumstances at all, but she has donated that money, saying she does not want it. She wants to use it to promote understanding. So there are, you know, some meaningful efforts in this direction. And I don't want to be the crank or the cynic here. I just have concerns that the volume and the mass of the people who are embracing the expression of hate is quite large and generally impervious to even the, you know, when we stand up and denounce these incidents, there are many people who just say, oh, that's the goody two shoes, and they have ways of rationalizing it, and that is enabled by the leaders who have, you know, in the name of objecting to political correctness and in claims that we are a post-racial society.
Right.
That comes from white supremacists.
Right.
And are they reachable
Right.
That's a very big challenge.
Well, but I think also Upneet said something earlier, and you did too. You know, when we're talking about social media, Twitter, et cetera, there has to be a level of corporate accountability. And we haven't gone there yet. You know, has Facebook been held accountable for what they've allowed to be posted? No, they haven't. But Zuckerberg was on Capitol Hill testifying, and I know it wasn't the first time. But we need to really have that conversation, and that is a global conversation, and it's something that we have to have. You know, are the powers that be strong enough to take on, you know, Twitter and Facebook, et cetera? I don't know, but that's part of the conversation, isn't it? And then also, you know, just talking about the attack on the Capitol in January, and we had a Zoom call about that attack. We've yet to see those who were responsible for that assault on our Capitol held responsible. And that's still ongoing. And here it is. We're at the end of March. It happened on January 6th. But I think people are hungry for the truth, Peter, and I'm not sure that restorative justice is considered goody two shoes per se. I think it's called truth telling. And I think people want a decent place to live in, whether it's in the United States or anywhere in the world. And I think there's a hunger for that. And I do think that there, around the world, there are examples where where restorative justice has been successful. And there have been, like in South Africa, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and in other places, Rwanda. So, you know, I know we're not just dreamers here. I mean, we're here because we care, and we're here because we want a better world. Paulo, and then we'll close. We're running out of time. Paulo, go ahead.
By listening, Peter, I was thinking, what if we create some idea on using Facebook, Instagram, and so on, and create some space for dialogue using these platforms? Because maybe they need help to see how they can create some space for these dialogues. For example, if we can use Zoom, but it's limited. If you can create a room for conversation on Facebook and can reach billions in the world.
Good idea.
Maybe if we can create some idea, present to them and show them, maybe, can you create some space for dialogue? Some room for dialogue? We can create some very specific rules and for the type of conversation, the people. And the good thing is, they know who the people are. They can allow these people to enter in this room for conversation or not. They have all the access or the information, or each and every one that are in those platforms. Maybe I was thinking about that as you two are talking about that. Who knows?
Well, maybe we
can
can
show them.
continue. We could continue to have that kind of conversation at RJI, including you all and the others. Well, thank you all for being here today and tonight. So thank you. And we're going to
Thank
end
you.
this. So we will return. Thank
Great
you
to
all
talk
for
to
being
you.
with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
This
Goodbye,
is Lisa
everyone.
Ray
Thank
for
you.
RJI.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Good night.